Okay, video 3 on making this wire mesh. So what I realized is when I was working on the putting down the stroking these pads, the problem was that I think I stroked them a little too thick. They should have been done at 15 point instead of 20 point. A 20 point was too big. So we're going to change that to 15 point on the vertical and also on our horizontal lines. So I'm going to change that, and I'm going to stroke those at, whoops, I'm going to stroke those at 15 point, much better. So now those lines, if you look at here, they're not touching. We don't want them to be touching on either side. So, okay, now is the part where we start rendering. But I think actually before we do that, we want to see where there's this gap here. I want to kind of fill that in so that there's I can have all 5 wires as the beginning of my pattern. So in order to do that, I'm going to duplicate my vertical wires layer, and I do that by dragging it down to this icon here at the bottom, which will create a new layer. And I'm going to turn down the opacity to 50% on that layer, and I'm going to turn down the opacity 50% here. Now I'm going to zoom in, and this top vertical wires copy, I'm going to drag it up just so it lines up and it continues up here. So I think that's pretty close. Let's take a look. I think that's good. So let's put this at 100% and this one at 100%, and it looks to me like that overlays pretty well. That's much better. And we can, if we want to, drag this out again, but I think at the bottom here we're all right. As long as we've got these 5 lines covered, we're good. So let's merge those 2 vertical wire layers together. We're going to merge that down so they're all in one layer. Very nice. And now we're going to start the bevel and embossing process. So bevel and emboss is an effect, and it is a great effect. It's great for making anything that is tubular or cylindrical. It will allow you to render a lot of detail, especially with metal or arteries or nerves, whatever it is that you're doing in your medical illustration. And you can, well, let me just do it instead of talking about it. So let's go down to here. We're going to go into we're going to make sure our vertical lines is selected. We're going to go to Effects, and we're going to go to Bevel and Emboss. Now, Bevel and Emboss has a few settings here that we have to deal with. The first thing we're really going to work from the bottom up. And the first thing we want to do is we want to pick our shadow color. We're going to keep it on multiply because that's a very good shadow effect. And right now it's at on 40%. We're going to try it on like 50%. And for the highlights, we want to set this, I think we want to set it at linear dodge. Linear dodge is great. It puts down a very, very bright highlight on your on whatever it is that you're bevel and embossing. And right now this blue would be used as a reflected light, but we don't want a reflected light. We want like an actual white light because this is metal, so we want bright brights and dark darks. And another thing we want to do here and keep in mind is there's different ways of showing the bevel and emboss. Right now we're just going to go with the first one, and this wheel right here denotes our light source. This particular dot is where is the object itself, and this is the light. So we want to go and do about 145. We can say 145 here. And we want the distance to be about 30. Maybe 25 is better. Let's try it. That's better. Let's see. Let's try 135. 125? 125, I think it is. So let's do the angle at 125 and the altitude at 25 degrees. Next, we want to make sure our light direction is coming from the top left-hand corner, or wherever your light source is coming from. I usually like to say in the top left-hand corner. So right now the direction is coming from the bottom right-hand corner, and that's what down means. So we're going to do the direction up. So we have our light source on this side and the shadow on this side. We want an inner bevel, not an outer bevel. And an outer bevel will obviously put the bevel on the outside of our object, but we want it on the inside. And our technique, smooth, is good for what we're doing. The next thing we want to do is size and soften. Size will increase the size of the bevel inside your painted piece here. So we're going to increase that by, let's see, 4, 5, let's see, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, maybe 10, maybe 9, maybe 10. I think 9 I like the best. 10 maybe a little bit too much. And soften we're going to keep at 0. I don't want these wires too much as far as the highlights and shadows. So let's hit OK on that, and we can zoom in and take a look at what these look like. Nice highlights, nice shadows using our Bevel and Emboss. Now we want to make sure that this effect is permanent inside our pattern here. And in order to do that, we'll have to merge this effect with another blank layer. So we're going to create a new layer by pushing the new layer button down here. We're going to put that layer underneath our vertical wires layer and select them both by holding down the Shift key and clicking on each one, and then going to merge layers. And now that effect is embedded in those particular lines. We're also going to do this effect, same effect on, oh, you know what? Let me back up a little bit in our history palette. I don't want to merge that down just yet. Let's look at our layers. Go back to history. Oops. Layer style. Layer style is where we want to be. So the effect is here. What can we do with this effect? Well, we can duplicate this effect without having to do it again. If we hold down our Option key, we can click and drag this effect into the next layer so that that effect duplicates into the horizontal wires layer. Now I'm going to do that again. I'm going to hold down the Option key, click and drag, and it duplicates the effect. So now we want that effect merged with both the horizontal wires and the vertical wires. So we're going to create 2 new layers. I'm going to put those layers underneath each one of our vertical and horizontal wires layers. And then we're going to select both by holding down the Shift key and going to merge layers, or Command E. Here we're going to select both layers and press Command E, and they're merged. So now those are merged layers. But now we're going to bevel and emboss it again. While we put down our highlights and our shadows, we are now going to put in our reflected light and our opening shadow here. So let's go to bevel and emboss again. And now, instead of the direction being up, we're going to have it down. And right now, the width of the highlight is causing this weird pattern where it's almost exactly the same. But we don't want it exactly the same. We want to pull that down a bit and make it look a little bit more like shadow, highlight, core shadow, reflected light. Now we have that size down to 3. Our linear dodge we are going to change to, I think, a color dodge. And instead of using this white, we're going to use, I like to use sort of a lighter blue as a reflected light. And we are going to increase the size just a little bit, but not by too much. We could also go into our gloss contour, and we can go into the contour editor and change how that contour actually is reflected on our object. You don't want it too much. Let's see how that looks. Probably going to decrease the shadow a little bit. Maybe change that color dodge to, let's see, light or just normal. Actually, normal's pretty good. We can make it a little brighter though if we want. There, that's better. Okay, so now our vertical wire reflected light is done, and we're going to drag that down by holding down the Option key and drag it over to our horizontal wires too. So now we have something that looks a hell of a lot more like wires than just flat lines. So we're going to take those layers and we're going to merge them again. So we're going to make new layers and we're going to drag them out underneath these are our original layers, and we're going to merge this effect. Merge layers, Command E we can use, or go down to merge layers again, just like that. So now we're going to bump this up a little bit, and there's a couple ways that we can bump up the contrast. I want these shadows, I think, to be a little bit more punchy in some areas. Now we can do that one of two ways. We can go to Image, Adjustment, Brightness, Contrast, and we can just up the contrast of it that we want. But unfortunately, it ups the contrast and the brightness of the whole object, and I don't want to do that. I just want to make these darks a little darker. So I'm going to go to Image, Adjustments, Replace Color. And I am on the vertical lines layer, and I'm going to pick this dark right there. Right now, the fuzziness is set at 35, but I may want to increase it, let's try 50. And now we're just going to decrease the lightness a bit, and ooh, that's punching up really nicely. That's at 30. Let's try it at 40, like negative 40. That's starting to look better. Maybe a little less though, maybe 35. That's good. I like that. I'm going to hit OK on that. And we're going to do the same with the horizontal wires. We're going to go to Image, Adjustments, Place Color. And we are going to select this dark area here and turn the lightness down at 35. There we go. Hit OK. And now this is starting to look like a lot of wires to me. So the next thing we're going to do now is now we have the ever so fun part of weaving these wires in and out of each other. And that is probably the most laborious part of this whole process. But it has to be done because these wires weave in and out of this, and there's nothing you can really do. So I'm going to do the first few, and then I'm going to cut out and do them off screen, and then I will come back once they're all erased. So how do we go about actually erasing each one of these? Now, we could just pick an eraser and go in and try and erase, whoops, I was on the wrong layer, and try and erase each one of those areas out, and let's say pick each one and weave it in and out, which would actually be very sloppy. So what we want to do is we want to select the horizontal wires layer and use the selection as a mask for our in and out weaving pattern. So what we're going to do is we're going to hold down the Command key, which is the key with the apple on it, or the little splat. And as you can see, I'm pressing on the Command key, and there's a little box that comes up on this layer when I lay my cursor over the top of it. And that's what that's going to do, is select all of the objects on that layer. Now, what I want to do is I want to use that selection as a mask to be able to mask off some of these particular parts that are weaving in and out. But I want to do that on this layer. So the first thing I want to do, I'm going to deselect, I'm going to Command D, I'm going to deselect that selection. And I'm going to put a mask here under vertical wires. And you add a mask to a layer by clicking on this button right here. And what a mask will do is it will remove, it'll put a layer or like a covering over the top of certain parts of the illustration without actually erasing that illustration from your layer. So here I've put the mask on this layer, and I'm going to paint the mask onto this layer. But I'm going to select the horizontal wires layer first, and I'm holding down my Command key and I'm clicking. I'm going to decrease that selection, or at least contract it by 1, so that there's no sort of weird gap in between these wires moving in and out. So I'm going to go Select, Modify, Contract, and I just want to contract the selection by 1. That's all. And then I'm going to go back to my vertical wires layer, and I'm going to click on the mask. Then I'm going to pick my paintbrush, and right now I have it set at that 15 hard brush, and I am going to paint out the areas that I need to paint out, weaving each one, every other one, and essentially masking them out. Now, actually, I think I did that backwards. I need to do it the other way. This one needs to go under. Whoops. This one needs to go under, and that one's over, and this one's under. That one's over, this one's under, this one's under, and this one's under. I think that's correct for what we're the wires facing to the left. And when we get closer to the ones that are facing the right, we have to actually flip it the other way. So what I'm going to do is I am going to continue to erase these out. I'm going to stop the video here. I'm going to continue to erase these out, and I will come back after I've erased all these out, and you've erased them out too, and then we will check and compare, and you can see which parts of the mask you've done correctly and see which ones you've done incorrectly. And the way we're able to check that is if the mask is clicked right here and we hit the tab key, maybe not the not the tab key, the backslash key under delete. That allows us to see our mask as like an actual painted effect. So if I go back here, I can actually see the mask I am painting. On my illustration, which makes it a lot easier, and it allows me to move actually a little bit faster. So I'm going to leave it there, and I will come back with you when all of these are painted. Okay, see you soon for part 4.